So here is what Christine asked the CDC under a FOIA Freedom of Information request. Can you please clarify if you have any records of the separation of SARS-CoV-2 from everything else known as isolation and purification? A simple yes or no will do regarding the answer. Please use the Merriam-Webster's Dictionary common definition of isolation. And then she provided the definitions, and it's more than just the act of isolating. She gave the definition of isolation, which is obvious, which is meaning to separate one thing from all other things. So if you have a pen, these three things, these are all writing utensils. And if I isolate the pencil from the other two, then I have a pure pencil and nothing else. Another way to describe this, if that isn't clear enough, which hopefully it is by now, everybody has a drawer, maybe not everybody, but most people, of silverware and other things. So we have that drawer, and it has all these knives and spoons and forks, etc. And then on the side, because there's always a little more room, there's like the, the can opener and thing to open bottles that are stuck, and a corkscrew, and maybe 50 other things, because there's way too many for a normal drawer. And in that drawer, there is one extra cork top for the Flaska water bottle that I use, which, by the way, we have on our, I believe it's the Dr. Tom Cowan site. So there's a little plug. So that's this bottle, and it has a cork on top that seals the water in so it doesn't spill, and you can take that with you, and it's really a great water bottle. Anyways, the point is I have one extra cork stopper in that drawer. Now, if I wanted to know everything there is to know about that cork stopper, and get the chemistry of it, the shape of it, what it looks like, what it does it go into a bottle or not, and everything there is to know about that stopper. The first thing I would do is open the drawer, look through the door, and take the stopper out. And then I could do whatever kind of experiment I wanted, find out what it's made of or what it does. Does it go in a jar or a bottle, or what size or whatever, right? That's obvious. That's called isolation or purification, because the only thing I have is the cork stopper. It should be obvious to everybody by now that if you didn't do that, you can't possibly know what the cork stopper is made of and what it does. In other words, if you take the drawer and dump it out into a big plastic bin that contains all other kind of kitchen utensils, and then grind that up and say, now I'm going to tell you what the cork stopper does and what it's made of, that is a fool's quest, because it will never happen. So here's what the CDC responded to this Freedom of Information request for any evidence that SARS-CoV-2 has been isolated. They say the definition of isolated provided in the request is outside of what is possible in virology, as viruses need cells to replicate and cells require liquid food. However, the SARS-CoV-2 virus may be isolated from a human clinical specimen by culturing in a cell culture, which is the definition of isolation as used in microbiology and as indicated in the previous round of response in the resources provided. So this is the first time I've ever seen this in print, that the definition of isolation, according to virology, is to take a specimen, meaning snot or stool or bronchial fluid, from the person, from the patient, from the human person, and that process of taking the specimen from the person is called isolation. In other words, you have isolated the snot from the human being. And then you do the culturing and genome and the electron microscopy and all the rest. It's that process, it's that issue right there, which is what everyone should focus on, and what we have been focused on for 2 years. That is a ridiculous definition of isolation. That's like taking the drawer, dumping it into a bin. You have now isolated the contents of the drawer from the original drawer that it's in, and that is called isolation. But the amazing thing about this quote is they say the definition of isolation, meaning to separate something so that it can be studied, is outside of what is possible in virology. Why? Because there are no viruses. Otherwise, you could do it. Otherwise, lots of things that size, that shape have been isolated. In other words, separated from everything else. It's not technically difficult. So they're admitting, for the first time I've ever seen in writing, that the actual study of this thing called a virus is not possible in virology. Thank you very much. Let's move on.